Going into the final round of the London Chess Classic, Magnus Carlsen was in the lead, but it was still possible for him to be caught by Vladimir Kramnik in second place, but only if Kramnik defeated Adams. Now, Kramnik had the black pieces, and it was a Berlin defence. Adams played very solidly, Kramnik played very solidly, and, well, after a couple of hours, they agreed a draw. There wasn't much going on there. So, it was clear that Carlsen had won the tournament no matter how he played against Anand, but there was a huge amount of pride at stake, and Carlsen kept battling and battling. Let's take a look at that game right from the very start. Carlsen with the white pieces, and Anand also played a Berlin defence. Now, of course, we could go for this famous endgame, but it's clear that Carlsen wanted to keep the tension in the position, so there's a lot of pride at stake here. Bishop c5 from Anand. Knight c3 from Carlsen. This looks terribly solid, but actually there is a point to it. Carlsen has actually played this before, you can see in my notes here. Point is to grab the two bishops, and this is actually a very old way of playing the position. This goes right back to the 19th century. And yeah, Carlsen has played this way before. Well, let me just go back a couple of moves. Carlsen previously played castles against Wang Yue, but I think this is inaccurate. Let's just have a very quick look at how that game went. The point is this, that after bishop d7, black is able to exchange off the bishops. Now, this was quite a long game, but really, after this bishop exchange, white is only left with one bishop. Black has a very solid position. I don't think really white has any claim to an advantage in this position. So I think Carlsen improved on this today. He took on b6 immediately and played c3. Now the point is that after bishop d7, to avoid the bishop exchange, he dropped the bishop back straight away. Now I know this looks very modest indeed, but in preserving the two bishops, there's no doubt about it that white keeps a little advantage. So h3 from Carlsen, castle, so it's all terribly solid, but as I said, because of these two bishops, then white at least has the potential to gain the advantage. Now we have d4 from Carlsen. So we have a very standard kind of position here. With these two pawns like this against black pawns here. Anand's next move was very typical and I think very clever. Bishop c6. Now you can see that there is already pressure on the pawn on e4. And to some extent that forces the issue, because black is clearly threatening to take on d4 here. So what should white do? Well, if he pushes on with the pawn, of course, one might like to do that, but only if you have quick play on the queen side. Well, here you can see black's structure is very, very good indeed, preventing any c5 breakthrough. And then it'll be black's turn, maybe knight h5 and queen f6, or maybe knight h7 and queen f6 and knight g5. In any case, black is very quick to develop an initiative on the king side. So, not d5, but instead Carlsen just took on e5. Well, this looks very modest, but he still has the two bishops. Here, Nigel Short was recommending queen e2, and then putting the queen back to f1. It looks like quite a tortuous maneuver, but still, this is possible for white, because, hopefully one day we can, drive away this knight, play g3, and white still has those two bishops. But okay, this was not to Carlsen's taste. He exchanged queens, and then played g3. Now, at the start of this ending, we thought, of course, white is slightly better. But once again, we have a situation where Anand has the knights, and it's like he's on a mission in his life to prove that knights are superior to bishops. Well, let's see what happened. Knight d7, I think an excellent move. Bringing the knight round to c5 and into the weak square on d3. So nice manoeuvring from Vishy. If b4 preventing that, then that gives the bishop a nice square on a4. And actually, if you exchange the bishop pair, then black is absolutely absolutely fine, no problems at all. Well, rather similar to the game actually, but okay, here b4 looks like something of a weakness. Okay, so bishop e3 from Carlsen, knight c5. Of course, you know, if white wants a total draw, you can start exchanging pieces. But of course, Carlsen is playing for more. He protects his e-pawn. And now here, an interesting continuation. Vishy could have played knight d3. Okay, if white wants to play for a win, he has to play here to protect the b-pawn. Now knight e7 with the idea f5, breaking open the position and making use of the bishop on c6, a very dynamic way to play, very interesting indeed. Anyway, knight f5, knight f8 was played, also I think pretty good, because the knight on g6 is doing nothing, so it has to be redeployed. h6 from Carlsen, just squeezing. Bishop b5. Now I think this looks absolutely fine for black, and now after this move, well, the knight goes to d3. It's funny, after the game, Vishy was very dissatisfied with this position because he felt that he'd managed to put this knight into rather a precarious position on d3. He was rather dissatisfied. You know, he felt this knight was potentially vulnerable. But I don't know. I think that Vishy could play like this and just wait with the knight. You know, it can always be protected by a rook coming across, or you know, maybe rook c6, maybe rook d6. I feel that the knight is doing fine. But okay, Vishy was very dissatisfied with this, and you know, he took the bull by the horns and saved that knight with c5. And obviously, white does not want to allow the pawn to come to c4. White took. So Carlsen is now a pawn up, but Anand does have a lot of play, a lot of nice squares for his knights. But it is a very pragmatic way for Anand to play the position, because his knights have squares, and okay, he's playing against these isolated pawns. Still, there's no doubt about it, white is a pawn up, and Carlsen has winning chances here. So Vishy has kind of constructed a kind of fortress. Carlsen has put his pieces on the best possible squares. Of course, the knight on b1 is a dreadful piece. If Carlsen can improve the state of that knight, then you know, he'll be doing fine. But this is a difficult position because the knight is tied down to the pawn. So Anand is solid, and now I think Anand's next maneuver was very good. King h7, because that pawn, if white ever breaks through, that pawn restricts the king. And at first I thought this is very odd for Anand to play like this. But actually, you know, the more we looked, the more we realised this is actually brilliant defence. What Anand intends is h5, rook round the angles to here, h4, and after the exchange of pawns, then black has counterplay against the king. And that's why Carlsen reacted very quickly here. He can't mess around. He simply gave up the pawn on a3. But that means he's managed to activate his knight on d5. And although the pawns are level now, well, actually, Carlsen manages to take on b6. Of course, there was a threat. Yeah, position still very unclear indeed. Vishy manages to transfer this knight to this tremendous square on d4. But now it becomes very sharp indeed. Rook d7 check. Of course, we would, under normal circumstances, we would like to play our king up the board to g6. You know, it seems to be safer there. But then knight d5 is very awkward indeed, threatening, of course, a big knight fork on e7. So unfortunately for Anand, he had to play the king back to e8. Now this takes really strong nerves. I should say that Anand was playing very, very quickly in this game. Well, neither player was in time pressure, but it was noticeable that Anand clearly decided, right, I'm just going to move very quickly today. Why don't we like the king here? Because it's stuck on the back rank. You can see it's cut off. You know, just needed to get this rook into play and the king could be in desperate trouble. But Anand, well, here, because Anand had been playing so quickly, would you believe he thought for, I think he thought for, let me check my notes, I think he thought for almost an hour in this position on his next move. He was looking at lots of different moves. For example, rook takes f3, knight d5. This he didn't like, because he felt that white was better coordinated. You know, if these rooks come into the game, the king is dead. He felt this was just too risky. But he said slowly he realised that actually his pieces were on their best squares. So his next move, I mean, very cool indeed. He just passed. He played king d8 and saying, okay, all right, do your worst. Let's see what happens. Carlsen repeated moves and then tried knight d5. Okay, so the knight is brought back into the middle. And now Anand started to check. Okay, Carlsen could play king c1, but this is already quite risky. So instead he played more pragmatically and brought the rook back to b2. Anand exchanged and took the pawn on f3, and the knight came back to g5, keeping an eye on the pawn on e4. So pawns are now level, but of course white is still slightly better. He has strong knight on d5, active rook, pawn on c4. So Anand still has to be careful here. And Carlsen took on f6. Okay, well, so Carlsen now is a pawn up again. But rook a6, an excellent move from Vishy. So activating this rook, and that's going to secure enough play. Knight e8 check played. King came up the board. Oh, excuse me. Let me just go back a move. Instead of knight f6, the players mentioned afterwards, knight b4 was a tricky move. At first, Carlsen thought this may be good for white, but Anand has this really nice tactic. Knight takes e4. If knight takes rook, then there's a knight fork. If king takes, then rook takes, and in this way, black is going to eliminate white's final pawn, and, well, as Vishy said afterwards, even I can draw rook and knight against rook. Okay, knight f6 check. Knight takes f6 was played. Rook a6 activating, and now actually, after these checks, the players agreed to a draw. They repeated the position. Carlsen felt he had nothing more to play for. Well, really a great fighting game from both players. You know, all the other games had finished, and they played 6 hours. So fantastic. Credit to them. So the final scores: Carlsen won the tournament with 18 out of a possible 24. Of course, we're using the football scoring system. Kramnik was second with 16. Adams and Nakamura were third, equal on 13 points. Afterwards, Anand said that he felt his tournament was catastrophic. He said he doesn't know what's going on. He said it's been that way for a time. He put a lot of energy into preparing for this tournament, but it didn't go right. So quite an admission. Catastrophic were Anand's words. Carlsen said now that he has the highest rating of all time, he's absolutely thrilled. He looked very confident indeed. A tremendous performance from Carlsen. He scored +5 here, and he's looking very, very strong indeed. They both go on now in a month's time to play in the Vishy tournament. Now that is going to be very strong indeed. So that will be the next challenge. We'll see if Carlsen can maintain his excellent form, and we'll see if Anand can pick up a bit. Thanks very much for watching, not just today, but perhaps in the other clips you've seen. If you like these reports, then do subscribe to my YouTube channel. There are lots of other clips there, and even if there aren't tournaments, I'll be posting regular clips even when there aren't tournaments. Thanks very much for watching.